Well, as I was saying to folks as they were coming in, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this evening with us. We have a topic that is near and dear to our hearts tonight, how to speak with an Ohio legislator and, the important part, get heard. So tonight we have, I'm going to introduce Kristen first because she is our techie and she's there with the UU the Vote background, and well, couldn't do a darn thing without Kristen in the background helping us make this work. I am the Reverend Joan VanBecelaere, and I'm the Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice, Ohio. Teresa, you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. My name is Teresa Mills. I'm the Executive Director of the Buckeye Environmental Network, and I'm based out of Grove City, Ohio.
Great. And Larry, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Larry Bresler. I'm with Organize Ohio here in Cleveland.
And Larry and Teresa have years of experience in dealing with legislators. And we know that some of you have some experience too. So there's going to be a time at the end where we can share some of our stories and learn from one another. Okay. I want to start with a little bit of centering tonight, and that is with a quote from the late Representative John Lewis, who said, "Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society." Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet, and you are. Okay, start off with a picture here. This is sort of what a typical hearing room at the Ohio State Legislature looks like. Wanted you to see that. Something you should know, just some basics before we get into some more of the details, getting into the weeds. 20% of bills introduced in a session, in any particular session, are passed, but that means 80% are not. The following have the least chance of being passed by our Ohio legislature. Expensive bills. Those that involve major changes, major social changes, major legal changes, and those that deal with unpopular issues. Nobody likes to pass bills that are unpopular. We also want to talk about, come back here. We also want to talk a little bit about lobbying and nonprofits and congregations, just to set the stage here so that you know what the difference is as we talk about things. We use an IRS definition, of course. Lobbying is the attempt to influence legislation on a local, state, or national level. So that's what we mean, an attempt to influence legislation. We call it education too. Lobbying by nonprofits, such as UU Justice Ohio or Buckeye Environmental Network, is legal. It just can't be the entire sum total of what we do. We have a certain percentage of our time that we can do that. Partisan support, on the other hand, is illegal. So once somebody's elected to office, we can lobby them like crazy, and issues are always fair game. It's when they're candidates that we can't take a stand and start campaigning for somebody. Now, when it comes to lobbying, we talk about it in terms of two different kinds. There's grassroots and direct. Grassroots lobbying is when we're trying to influence legislation by communicating with the general public. When we ask you all to write a letter or call your legislator, or even to some extent when you're doing a public witness event, this is grassroots lobbying. Direct lobbying is when you talk directly with legislators, either by phone or in person, or nowadays by Zoom. So we're setting a few definitions here. When you're going to talk with legislators and when you want to be heard, you need to know what's going on. You need to do your homework in a very real sense. You got to know the process, and we're going to talk about that. You got to know the expected dates of hearings and votes, and that's often hard to find. So we'll show you where to look that one up. You got to follow the legislative process and know where bills are or issues are in terms of the larger picture. You got to know at which points you can even make some impact, and we'll talk about that. And then you have to look for changes and amendments that are made from one hearing to a next, because you don't want to storm into a hearing with this absolutely wonderful statement and argument, only to learn that the bill has been changed and every word that you have to say is now moot. So it does take homework. It does take being on top of things. That's one of the things that is probably the hardest part about being heard in the legislature, is knowing where to look for this stuff, because they don't make it easy, and how to find out what's going on. Okay. Once again, just label some of the strategies here in lobbying. Know the issue thoroughly. Identify core people and others that will lead your lobby effort, because you want to have some folk that are articulate, and know what they're doing. You want to locate a lawmaker who is sympathetic to your issue and will advance your cause. It may be wonderful and great to go and sit in somebody's office and argue with them, at 180 degrees opposite of what they believe or will support, but it's not going to get you anywhere. You have to understand the formal structure and procedures. And it's good to have a point person that spends as much time as possible at the side of the legislative body. In other words, a lobbyist. And that's not always possible, but it's good if you have someone, or somebody that's a lobbyist, so you can find out more information. So just some strategies there. Okay, now we're going to get into what you came here to learn. Legislative advocacy activities. We're going to go through some of these, and then a few of them, like testimony and in-person meeting, we're going to take those and we're going to expand on those. But just to get started here, what is the best way to reach out to your legislator? There's no one set answer for that. It really depends on what your objective is. Now, if you're looking to get new legislation introduced, or you have an idea for an amendment to something that exists, then you will want to have a personal face-to-face contact with a lawmaker or with their senior staff. Now, if you want to make a specific point about pending legislation, you can testify in a committee hearing. If you want to simply register support or opposition for a particular bill that's up on the docket right now, you can call a legislator's office. Or to ask a question, you can send in an email or leave a voice message, and you'll get a response, usually from a staffer, but you'll get a response. So here's a quick rundown on the screen right now of some popular forms of communication and some ideas about their usefulness. Okay, postcards and traditional petitions. These are really popular. They're easy during a legislative session. Unfortunately, however, they kind of lay in a pile until a staffer or one of the interns has a chance to go through them, sort through them, and then issue a report for the legislator. That can take weeks or even longer. And it's not a way to really have an impact on a fast-moving piece of legislation. And we know that these pieces of legislation can move overnight. So to have an impact instead, if you want to do a petition or a stack of envelopes or something like that, consider taking a great big box of them, something dramatic, right? Or a big, huge petition long, to the lawmaker's office in person. But otherwise, they'll come in the mail and they'll sit in a corner till a staffer gets to them. Okay, mass emails, including those that are generated by online petitions. Now, staffers will treat identical messages as spam, and they often respond with a little canned response. You get the same response to all of them. So anything where you simply fill out your name and a few other bits of information with no other personalization online, it's good, but it's not as effective. Using this route, instead, if you're doing something online, rewrite the provided text. personalize your message and make the introductory sentence something that is just totally eye-catching. Then it'll get noticed. But if it looks like everybody else's, the staffers treat it like spam. Okay, personal letters. Those work. Those work sometimes, especially if they're very personal. A non-form letter can really work. Your chances then are probably about 50-50 of getting a personalized response to something like that. However, by the time the office gets the letter, your bill may have been changed or amended or passed to another chamber. So snail mail is pretty slow. Email is better, personalized email. This approach actually with a personal letter is best if you're using it to raise a new issue or start a conversation with your legislator about a bill that you would like to see introduced in the future. Because you can do that, you know. You can say, I would really like to see this introduced. Although actually for introducing new legislation or a new idea, face-to-face meeting by Zoom, if possible, or when we all get vaccinated in person is more effective. And most public witness events are kind of on par with personal letters in terms of their effectiveness. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Phone calls, telephone calls. They work if you can't meet face-to-face or if you can't get a Zoom meeting. But if you want to influence a lawmaker's vote, you can call. You can call. And of course, if the phone lines go down because there's too many calls, that does say something to the legislator. Now, when you call, you probably talk to a staffer or you leave a voicemail, but your message will be heard and tracked along with other calls. If you can arrange it to have multiple constituents, multiple members of your group call a legislator's office on the same issue on the same day or two, then that increases your impact. Okay. And it says, you know, if possible, call on a Monday or a Friday between 9 and 4, because that's when the offices are less busy. And you tell the staffer your name and that you're a constituent, because they're going to ask for your address and what you're calling about. And be concise. Be short. Think of this as a 1.5-minute speech. Tell them how you'd like the legislator to vote. Or if you want, you can ask the lawmaker, you know, how is the lawmaker planning to vote on a particular issue? You can ask them to consider a particular factor in their decision. If you can do something personal, then you're ahead of the game. Be polite. Be polite, because the very last thing you're going to need is for a staffer to start recognizing your phone number as trouble and start screening out and ignoring your calls, because they'll do that. You always thank the staffer at the end of the call. And if you want to follow up, be sure to ask for it. You know, please get back to me. Let me know since you didn't know A, B, or C. And if you get a lawmaker's voicemail, feel free to leave a message and ask for a call back. You'll usually get a staffer. You'll more than likely get a call back. Sometimes you may even get one back from the legislator. I have. Now, when to use email instead? If you need a lawmaker to send you a document, that is testimony that they provided at a hearing or agendas for a committee that they chair, okay? If you need them to send something or answer a question about legislation that they're sponsoring, those types of kind of specific things where you have to outline it are often best done in an email. And that way they can respond to you in the same way. Or if you're just shy and you absolutely hate telephones, okay, but you want to ask your lawmaker to vote a certain way, a quick email will help. And there's actually an app for that on the Ohio State Legislature page, one for every single office, every single legislator. But always be sure to make sure, you know, that you include your home address to tell them you're a constituent and not somebody calling in from Eastern Oregon. Okay. And then just a word about social media before we continue on. Some of our state lawmakers are very active on Twitter and Facebook. So take a look at your representatives or your state senator's social media. And if they seem to be interacting with people that way, you can reach out to them on their social media. Hit them up with a simple non-confrontational request or a question. And if you get a response, then you've started something good. But if you're rude or aggressive, then all bets are off. Don't do it. Okay? And like I said, we're going to talk more about testimony and in-person meeting as we continue on. So that's just some of the very basics, starting with, sort of the least effective, and then working our way up to things that actually get you heard in a more realistic way. Let's talk about public witness events. Public witness events are a little bit different. They're not advocacy per se. They're out there. They're on the streets. They're on the sidewalk. They're educational. They help you organize people. They're great for publicity. Rallies have a lot of media attention, which is wonderful. Street theater gets you media attention. Larry, Teresa, what are some of the good things about doing some public witness events?
Get your issue out to the public, and particularly, and it's a way to get media attention that you might not be able to get otherwise.
Okay. Oh, you're muted, Teresa.
I know. I'm always muted. People would love to have me muted all the time, but too bad. I have participated for 30 years in public witness events. That's probably one of the most effective and most energizing things that you can do for your issue, is to get it out into the public, get it in front of the media. That sometimes helps more than anything else we do. So.
Yeah, it's more outward directed, whereas the other forms of advocacy we're talking about are inward directed, or directed more towards the legislators themselves. If you can do both, then you are ahead of the game. If you can have people in meetings or in committee hearings and testifying whilst others are doing some public witness work, then you're covering both that outward directed energy and that inward persuasive directed energy at the same time. That's hard right now. Because of, COVID right now is making it much harder. We would never be standing that close together for any kind of public witness event right now. That's too close. And of course, no masks, but it's still too close. So that makes it difficult, but this COVID is not going to last forever. And when it's over, we can go back to doing the kinds of public witness that we want to do and the kinds of face-to-face meetings that we know are really effective. Okay, any questions? Kristen, have you seen questions?
I have not seen any questions at this moment, but we can go on and I'll save them for the next stopping point.
All righty, excellent. Okay, Teresa.
Okay, I just love this cartoon. It starts out, looks like it's very simple to get a bill to make its way through, all the way through. But you see when it gets close to the finish line, it all just becomes discombobulated. You can't follow anything. And that's honestly the way it is at the State House. So go ahead. Okay, to track a bill, I track bills quite often. I tracked Senate Bill 33, which is the anti-protest bill that the governor just signed. That was sometimes it was quite difficult to keep track of where it was. But if you want to do that, then you go to the legislative webpage at the legislator.ohio.gov, and you can search by the bill number. Is that the link there to that page?
No.
Joan? Okay.
No.
Okay, let's go on then. If you can't find the bill number that you're looking for, call the sponsor's office and ask them for a copy of the bill number, and maybe even ask them to send you a copy of the bill. So ask them for the bill number and a copy of the bill. If it's a bill, if the bill is that you oppose has not been introduced yet, it says here to focus on something else for a while. I would continue, if you know that someone is introducing a bill and you're opposed to it, I would certainly start contacting people right away. When we had a bill, an environmental bill, come up last session, I got a call from a legislator who informed me the bill was, the sponsor was asking for co-sponsors. So I immediately called the sponsor and said, you know, talk to me about your bill. And his first response was, I haven't even introduced it yet. How did you know about it? And I said, well, I'm on a steering committee or a task force of 150 people, and we know everything. So that was kind of intimidating to him, but he did have face-to-face meetings with him, and he never issued his sponsor testimony. So we defeated it, but we were relentless in it. So sometimes if you know there's something going on, like I know that a bill was recently introduced yesterday. It has not received a number yet, and it has not actually been introduced. It's just in draft form. I tried to get it today because I think it's going to be a devastating bill, but I'm being told that it's not public information yet. So I'm holding out hope. So especially talk to your own legislator, even if they're not sponsoring it. I think a lot of times when we're doing legislation, we focus so much on committees that by the time it's passed in committee, it can go to the House or the Senate the same day and be passed, and you have not had time to educate your own legislators. I kind of got off track there, but anyway, okay, Joan, go ahead. Okay, you can sign up for committee notices. Once the bill has been introduced and been assigned to committee, you can contact the committee chair and ask them to put you on their notification list. That list goes out usually on late Thursday or Friday. I've even seen it be postponed until a Sunday because I send out notices to about 2,000 people every week to let them know what's going on at the State House as related, as related to environmental legislation. You can go on the committee site. You can also look at the calendar for the past and future hearings, download copies of other people's testimony. And, you know, there's nothing wrong in teaching yourself or developing your own testimony by educating yourself using other people's testimony. Just make sure that their testimony is correct. So check the weekly notice schedule on the state or the House or the Senate webpage. That's also available. Okay, track a bill. If you would like to testify, wait for the notice that would be coming out, which you would be receiving from the chair of the committee if you have signed up for it. And then you have 24 hours before the committee hearing to submit your testimony. You have to submit your testimony 24 hours in advance. I also, I agree with this, but as I said before, I would not just send it to the chair. I would send it to, what I've done in the past is send it to the entire legislature, both House and the Senate. So everybody knows what my opinion is, whether they care or not. But anyway, I always do that. If your bill is flagged for a possible vote, contact your member if they are on the committee and remind them how you would like them to vote. Try to find out how the committee members voted. Check back after the hearing. And if the status, if it was passed or reported by the committee, use the vote tab for roll call. Sometimes this doesn't appear on the web page for 2 or 3 days. When Senate Bill 33 was passed, it did not appear for, I think, 3 days. So, and I actually had to call the State House and ask them when they were going to post it. So once a bill is out of committee, watch for the calendars for coming up for the House and Senate on the House or Senate webpage and see if it's scheduled for a vote. On Senate Bill, and I'm sorry I keep referring to Senate Bill 33, but that's the freshest in my mind. Senate Bill 33 set, all it had to do was be voted on by the full House, and it set for months without any movement. So we thought that we had it licked, that it was going to die in the General Assembly. The very last day of session, they dusted off the dust and passed that bill. So always be ready for anything. To get an email alert, sign up with the clerk's office or the email notification on Rules Committee. I've never been able to actually do that myself. To get anything out of the Rules Committee. They say that they meet, but they don't tell us typically what they're meeting on. And if anybody knows different, then please let me know that.
Then how do you get your notices, Teresa?
Do I?
Then how do you get the notices? From a friendly staffer you've cultivated?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is, but they still don't send me the Rules Committee. Okay, I get committee notices, but not the Rules Committee, because that changes so regular. Read the rule report to see which bills have been scheduled for floor votes. Once you see the bill, start making calls. If you want to contact your legislator, to know how you expect them to vote. If you haven't already been contacting your legislator, it may be too late, because they can pass a bill out of committee and immediately send it to the full floor. So you need to concentrate just as much on your own legislator as you do the committee members. Joan, and I apologize for my voice, but I can't really help it. So, okay, Joan's going to do this, and we're going to go through briefly what this is. The summary just gives you a short title. This was Senate Bill 33. So the short title, then there's a list of documents.
Oops, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. As enrolled. As enrolled means this is the way it passed. So that's the final vote. Then the status is, this goes through that was introduced in January, February of 2019. It passed out of the House on 120, House Committee, sorry, and then it finally passed 12 of 20. So it's set for a long time without any action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, votes. Okay, this is important, because this tells you how each member voted on the bill that you're talking about. So I know sometimes we have, we get a little forgetful. So what I always do is I send out the breakdown of the votes to the 2,000 members that I email. So I remind them the next bill that comes up, how their member of the legislature voted. So I think that's very important. And another thing that is important here is, and you guys are the first ones to really know about this. We're going to be working with Joan and several other groups in the state of Ohio, and we are going to take Senate Bill 33 to the United Nations as human rights violations. So, we're going to do that, and we will use that legislative vote as justification for why we're doing it. We will also, you'll see here, 171 citizens testified against Senate Bill 33, 9 proponents. So there were 9 proponents, 171 opponents, and Governor DeWine signed the bill anyway. Plus, we delivered almost 4,000 signatures on a petition that I hand delivered to the governor's office. If we weren't under COVID and it wasn't so cold, what I probably would have done was taken 4,000 postcards to represent the 4,000 signatures, stapled them to a ribbon, went in and testified if I could have. And as I testified, I would have unraveled the ribbon of postcards onto the floor and left them there. That would get their attention. So, but I'm a little bit ornery. So, okay, Jeff. Sorry.
What you can see on this too is the written statements of all of the people who have testified.
Right.
Now, in the early days before the pandemic hit us, people would send in their written testimony, like opponent testimony, and it would show up for that hearing. And then they would come in person and they would give the highlights of their testimony. As we got into COVID, now it's all written testimony. And some people are brave enough to go in and try to do spoken testimony as well. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Republican legislators don't wear masks.
Right.
It's a point of pride with them. And so we find ourselves putting our lives on the line when we try to do any in-person testimony at this point. So yes, there are people pushing to actually get the right to do Zoom testimony, but that has not yet been approved by the powers that be at the legislature. So you will see on the UJO Facebook page, for example, several calls for petitions and letters, especially letters, to get legislators to ask for permission to start using Zoom testimony opportunities. So that's something we're trying to do right now, because you shouldn't have to put your life on the line to go and do some testimony. Okay.
Well, here's my feeling on that, Joan. It's very easy for the legislators to say, oops, we're having trouble with our Zoom. My opinion is, if we, the owners of that house, that is our house, cannot go back to our own house, then they shouldn't be allowed to vote on anything. If we can't present our feelings in person, then they should not be allowed to vote on anything. But that's just my opinion.
Yes. And it's a good one, dear. But that's what we're fighting right now.
I know.
Is for the right to actually get ourselves to be heard. Because you can send in the written, and I'll tell you how you do that. Right. But there is absolutely nothing better than to stand in a hearing and talk with the legislators on the committee and answer their questions right then and there. That's very effective. Right. Oh, I'm going to share a little quick cartoon and see if there's any questions before we move on to talking about committee testimony. As you see, here's a bill becoming law as introduced, as amended, as enacted, as funded, as implemented, as understood by the public. I like that one. And then what people actually needed. So just a little cartoon there. Okay. All right. This is a typical Senate hearing room at the Ohio State Legislature. A little larger there.
Okay. We do have some questions.
Okay, let's hit those first.
So first of all, for Joan, for your section at the beginning, talking about what types of way we reach out to our legislators, does that also apply at the national level?
Most of it, although it's kind of hard to call up and get friendly with one of the staff people.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know a lot of people are asking about slides and videos, so I just want to say we will be sending that out to you at a later date. As soon as we get the video up to YouTube, we'll send all of that out to you.
Yeah, we'll Send
So
a
you will
link.
get copies. And the question in the chat was, how do we get reluctant legislators to listen to actual factual science?
All right, Teresa, Larry, any thoughts on that one? If you're dealing with a non-friendly legislator, and let's say you've got a meeting with them.
Go ahead, Larry. If you
I
had
try
something.
to look beforehand to find out what are the legislators' interests, what have they been involved with in the past, what have been their priorities, and find a way to appeal to those. So there was a legislator who I know was just incredibly active and incredibly cared about education, and particularly and used to be a sports coach. And so somehow when I was dealing with something completely different, but I found a way to tie it into that. And by doing that, it developed something of a compatibility that we were able to talk about the issue that we really cared about.
Mm-hmm. So you start with a leverage point where you have some common ground.
Yes.
And then if you've established the common ground, you can move into things that are a little bit more controversial.
Exactly.
I always try to go with the lowest common denominator first, and that's try to make friends and with their aides, because the aides typically know more. They have to educate themselves more than the legislator does. The legislator usually isn't really that educated on the issue until their aides inform them. So I always try to start with some people get insulted if they get put off to an aide. I welcome talking to aides. They're the ones that have the legislator's ear. They can open up the room for you and open up the conversation for you. So that's my advice.
And I'll agree with that one, Teresa. Years ago, I used to teach economics of the public sector to those aides, to the policy analysts. And I do know that they do the work, they do the research, they look up the stuff, and then they present the argument to the legislator.
Right.
So there's a great deal of leverage there if you can get to know some of the senior aides, some of the senior aides. I see somebody here said, can we email or call all members or just your own? No, you can call the others as well, especially at the state level. But it's good to start with your own, especially if you're asking specific questions, or you want some legislation introduced, or you want some relationship that will get you some leverage points. If you're talking to all of the Judiciary Committee or the Public Utilities Committee people, then you can call all the people that are on that committee. And that page we showed you will tell you who is on the committee and have links to how you can contact them. So it depends on what you're after.
Right.
Okay. And
One more question.
Oh, what do you do when there's a bunch of bills you have a problem with all being passed at the same time?
Clone yourself. That's always a problem.
Yeah.
And they do that intentionally.
Lame duck especially.
Yeah.
Larry?
Boy, that's a problem. I don't know to have a good stiff drink. I mean, you're going to have that, and I think you've got to sometimes you got, and to some degree you got to prioritize, or you network with people that are working in particular areas, and you provide more support to the ones that you care most about, and probably less support to the ones you don't. Active support, active involvement.
And isn't this where our grassroots lobbying work comes? Because I am only me. You are only you, Teresa, Larry, etc. But if we have a whole bunch of other folk, like when I send out something to the whole You Joe list, and we're able to get people to do different calls on different bills, then we can magnify, we can amplify our voice.
Yep.
Okay.
And we did that on 33 and several others, like I know Joan sent out information on 33. We had so many calls and so many emails going into the governor's office that we jammed the phone lines, and we jammed the governor's email.
Yeah.
We did have a contact that was a very close friend of the governor, so we asked him to contact the governor and ask the governor to make sure the phone lines were opened up, especially on the weekend. So always think about that too, clog them. Back when they did SB 5, which was the union bill, they did something, maybe I shouldn't share this, but I will. They did something called getting libraried. And this was a term that the legislators developed, was they got libraried. And what that meant was the unions had people go to every computer that they had access to. If you had, 10 computers at the library, get 10 people to go. And what they did was everybody hit send at the exact same time. And it overloaded the State House email. So they got library. It shut down the State House email. So, and that's, I know that's not what we're here to discuss. Sorry, I can't help myself. Like I said, I can be ornery.
But this is where networking and grassroots work really, really pay off. And you can also use all of those different tactics, those different strategies that I outlined at the first, including public witness if we can.
Right.
Somebody said, how do we find out what other bills other organizations are working on or interested in doing? Coalitions.
Yeah.
Coalitions. UU Justice Ohio couldn't exist without being in coalition relationship with other organizations like Buckeye and Sierra Club and Organize Ohio and Ohio Votes and. Too many damn meetings, yes, okay, that's my job. But that way I know what they're working on and they know what we're interested in and we can collaborate.
The other way, just to, in terms of the areas that you have a particular interest, your priorities, whether it's environmental or whether it's in others, there are organizations that are on top of this all the time, and be part of, check their Facebook page, check their web pages, and you'll find out the priorities at any given time.
Right, and try to collaborate with them.
Yes, exactly.
Because every small organization or nonprofit or congregation has something to offer, or else you would not exist. So don't say, oh, we're too small, we can't offer anything. Bull. You do, and you can be a good collaboration partner. Okay, shall we move on?
Yep.
All righty. We have the opportunity, which we very rarely ever take. We have the opportunity to go directly to these hearings and speak our piece and tell the legislators exactly what we think of this bill or what we want them to change. And it can be incredibly effective. Not only is it an act of public witness, but it actually can change some hearts and minds. I've seen it. It does work. Now, right now, of course, with COVID, like I said, it's real problematic because you can only send in written testimony when nobody's wearing masks in the room. But it is effective. And it's just one of those things that we don't use often enough. So short of meeting with the committee members on a particular committee like public utilities or whatever, short of meeting with each one of them individually, which takes a whole heck of a lot of time, testifying on a bill is the most effective way, I think, to influence the people who are going to be deciding whether to advance that piece of legislation to the larger House or the larger Senate, or whether they're going to amend it. So, this is something that I would love to see more people get involved in. I'd love to see more people take the plunge of actually speaking. And it is wonderful when there's an audience. When you have maxed out the hearing room, and you have maxed out the overflow room next door, and people are that you can't carry the big signs, but you can wear interesting t-shirts.
Mhm.
And we have passed around little quilt blocks, okay, which we have raised up out of our purses at particular points during legislation. Or at one point when we were talking about some of the abortion issues, people took off their outer jacket their outer coat and had their message spelled out in letters across the line of witnesses that were all seated there. Stop the vote, you spell it out. There's ways, but there's so many different levels at which it is effective. But we don't use it enough. We don't use it enough. So let me tell you how it happens. When you're doing committee testimony, okay, make sure you have somebody, if you can get somebody who's influential or highly regarded, or somebody that can give personal experience, or interested citizens with a compelling story to tell, then you're ahead of the game. You can stand up there and say, I'm against this. But if you've got a name or a personal experience or great story, once again, you're going to be ahead of the game. And people listen to stories. People listen. They want to hear stories. Even legislators want to hear the stories, okay? You can do documentation and statistics and the research papers, but I suggest that you put that into the written part of your testimony. Don't stand there in front of the committee and read statistics, because they will not listen to that. But you can put it in your written section, the stuff you submit in advance, and that way it backs it up. And some of the legislators really like that, because when they go to the House floor or the Senate floor, they've got some data at hand, okay? When you testify, write it out ahead of time. For the love of God, don't wing it, because those guys are intimidating, and it's mostly guys, okay? It's mostly white males, let's be real. And they are intimidating, and they try to be intimidating, and they will throw you off your game, and you will not make your point, and you will ramble, and then they will say, thank you very much, bye. So write it out carefully. Relate the testimony to the interests of the committee members if you can do some research in advance and know what that is. Like, I know your church did such and such and such when they were concerned about these issues, and I applaud that, and I would love to see the same for my congregations, and that's why this bill has got to be stopped. Things like that. And then you pack the committee room with friends, colorful friends, friends that make a statement as they're sitting there. Okay.
Can I add just one thing, Joan, real briefly?
Sure enough.
My experience, that one of the things I frequently do every couple of years during the budget stuff is try to bring people to tell their personal stories who are low income in terms of, as we're talking about human service things. And my experience has been that the legislators listen to personal stories. They really listen to personal stories.
Yep.
And if you have a good personal story, tell it. And whether it's from your own or sometimes we've had social workers coming down there and doing it. And so, you don't have to, when we talk about highly influential or people with high expertise, that isn't necessarily the most important all the time. No. People being personal, having personal stories to relate, can be highly influential.
And it depends on the bill that you're dealing with.
Yes.
But even people who have expertise can also be people who tell a compelling story.
Yes.
I mean, climate change, right? You're talking about statistics and charts, and no, even people that know the science really well can tell a compelling story.
Yes.
So yeah, you're right on. Compelling story is what changes hearts and minds. Let's see. Any other comments on that, Teresa?
The only thing, I totally agree. I'm always of the opinion that the citizens, the personal testimony, those are the experts because they're the ones that live it every day. So I agree. Personal stories make a big difference.
And we've all got those.
Yeah, and please don't stand up there and give statistics and all of that, because that's just a big yawn session. So it's very important, yes, but put it in your written testimony.
Put it in writing.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's not rocket science to get permission to testify, but you do have a process. That's why God invented bureaucracy, I guess. Okay, so you got to tell the chair of the committee, actually it's the staffer of the chair of the committee, 24 hours in advance that you want to testify in person. You can submit written too if you want to, and not testify in person, but if you're going to testify in person, also submit your written 24 hours in advance. And that's where you check the schedule, as Teresa talked about. You send them an electronic copy of your written testimony, because they're going to put it into an iPad for each one of the legislators. On a hearing, each one of the legislators on that committee have an iPad. And the iPad has all the written testimony in there, and it has the list of who's going to speak and who they are. And so sometimes, you'll be speaking and they'll be looking at their iPad, which is not bad, because that means they're reading along and looking at the detail of what you're saying, which is really great. Make sure you read the directions and get the right email addresses and send it to the right person when you need to do that. Okay, because yes, you can go in at the last minute, and sometimes they may let you testify if you haven't submitted things properly, but usually they'll say no. No, you got to get it in 24 hours ahead. You don't have to read your written testimony word for word either. You can provide some additional details. You can tell the story in a more colloquial way. You can just do the verbal highlights, okay? So you don't have to just sit there and read the paper that you sent in earlier. Make it live, all right? If your senator or representative, the one for your district, is on the committee, call them first and let them know that you're going to be coming and what you're going to be talking about. And that way you may have a friendly face. You may not, but not guaranteed, but you may have a friendly face there, or you may be able to meet with them beforehand or after, especially after, and see what kind of impact your testimony had. And then don't just start taking pictures or making recordings, even though everybody's got a cell phone. You really need to get a permission to do that. And they have a cute little form you fill out at the very beginning. A staffer, has those on hand, and get that permission so that you don't have them coming over to you in the middle of the hearing and grabbing your cell phone. Okay. So those are just kind of the polite etiquette things to do. All right. So make sure too, when you get there, that you check in with the staffer, the chief staffer of the chair, and make sure that you're on the witness list. But if you spoke to them by phone or received an email to confirm that they received your written testimony, and you do get an email, then you'll be okay and you can skip that step. But I always go up and check with the staffer to make sure that I'm on the list, because sometimes they've forgotten. All right. And you don't ever know when you're going to be called to testify. So sometimes you're going to sit there for several hours, as the committee goes through all of the other bills or the other testimony, and you may be at the end. You are going to have to be patient. Bring water, bring a snack if you need to, but you're going to have to be patient. Then when they get to your bill and your name is called, you walk up to the podium and you start reading your testimony. You start telling your story. Testimony is typically delivered while standing, okay? I mean, because they're also recording. But if you have physical limitations that require you to sit, let the committee staff folk know, and they will set up a table and a chair and a microphone for you, okay? Because having done this with a broken leg once, I needed to sit. So don't let that one intimidate you. Then as you get up there, excuse me a second. Okay. Excuse me, guys. We had a little domestic issue going on there I had to take care of. Sorry. Take a deep breath when you get up there because, like I said, they want to intimidate you. Try to be as relaxed as you can. Don't read too quickly. Breathe where you can. But be sure that your testimony is short because if there's a lot of people testifying, then the chair may cut you off after 3 minutes. They usually give you 3 to 5. They usually tell you that in advance, but not always. So I always go up there with a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is a 3-minute, plan B is a 5-minute, where I can, elaborate on something, but just expect that. And there's a protocol to this too, and I've got that outlined on the slide. I'll go through it kind of quickly. Custom. You start with Chairperson Smith, Ranking Member Jones, that's the minority party. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this House bill. My name is such and such. But you always do that little introduction. It's like parliamentary procedure and politeness, right? Something about who you are and why you're interested in this thing. This is where you tell the story about yourself or someone else. You speak for 3 minutes. Like I said, if you can't speak, do the written. When you're done, the chair will ask if there are any questions. No matter how stupid the questions are, don't say that they're stupid, okay? Because they'll ask some doozies. Treat them with respect. Be polite, no matter how silly. And when I'm sorry, but when the legislator asks the question, you don't speak directly to the legislator asking the question. You're supposed to speak to the chair. Chair Smith, in response to Member Jones's question, let me say ABCXYZ. Everybody forgets that part. That's the way it's supposed to be. The lobbyists remember that. The lobbyists are practiced, right? But that's the way it's supposed to be, is that all questions are addressed to the chair, and the chair, is passing them on to the member. If you don't know the answer to something, that's okay. You say, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not an expert on this, that, or the other thing. I am just a person here telling you how this impacts my life. So, don't make stuff up, for the love of heaven. I've heard that one too. But just say, I don't know. And if you know where to find out, then you can do the research when you get home and send that into the staffer, and the staffer will send that to all the committee members. So follow up if you do that. Okay. So just some thoughts there on that. All right. Let's see here. In-person meetings, Teresa.
Yes, I just love in-person meetings. You can always ask for a meeting. You can ask for a meeting with your state legislators. You can ask for meetings with any of the state agencies. Ask for a meeting every chance you get. Right now, it's kind of hard to get it's not hard to get a meeting because they are doing some meetings on Zoom. I was in one meeting that the legislator set up, and he had just the free personal Zoom account. And that was intentional because it shut us off after 40 minutes. So it was quite interesting. But it can be a very effective way to get your lawmaker interested in your issue or your subject. And especially if it's not already getting their attention. You may be able to meet with a legislator in Columbus. A lot of them do hold constituent meetings back in their district. So if you can't make it to Columbus, then ask about holding a meeting in their district. The same goes with your federal representatives. Most of them have offices in Ohio also. So it's hard to reach, their staffers in DC, but you can almost always reach them at their Columbus or their Ohio office, call the legislators and try to set up an appointment. The most they can do is say no. But especially at this day and age with the virus, they're more likely to say yes now than no. So, and again, become friends with their staff. Before meeting with the legislator, you should know how to approach the subject or similar matters that they have been interested in the past. If you've never met with the legislator, then you should try to establish credibility first. And that means maybe dropping a name here or there. Yeah. Governor DeWine, what's his name, told me that I should contact you, the office, and, stuff like that. Don't be afraid to drop other people's names that, we call it power mapping. Who has the power to influence the legislator that you're going after. So if you know someone that is friends or has coffee with your legislator, make sure that you get their permission first, but drop their name. So then when you go, make sure that you have documentation to support. Don't overstuff an envelope. Give them the most important things that you think justify your stance. I shouldn't say justify, because I think just being there is justification enough. But again, that's just me.
Supportive.
Okay. Huh?
Supportive.
Supportive, yes. Yeah, stuff that'll back you up. Okay, Joan. At the meeting, if you have a personal story, of course, always start with that. Especially if it's about the current law, if it's something that has impacted you. Bring a few other people with you. Please do not bring 10, 12, 14 people. 2 or 3 people is great, because by the time everybody has their say, you're out of time and there's no time to have a real in-depth conversation with the legislature. If you're alone, indicate if you are speaking on behalf of a group. I would always say, do not ever go to a legislator's office alone, because they can certainly say, I did not say that. But if you have someone there, more than one person there, then they would be less likely to say that. Connect your issue to the lawmaker's area of interest if you can find that out. If you're not sure, visit the legislator's webpage or the House or the Senate Facebook page, or not Facebook, website, to see if they talk about anything in their press releases. Okay.
Okay.
Again, I already said this, but if you're instead of meeting in Columbus, I'm sorry about my voice, try to meet in the district, pick up the legislator, ask them to, meet you at, Starbucks for a cup of coffee, or someplace where you can have social distancing. And, I would certainly ask them to make sure they wear a mask, that's just me. Members often announce office hours when constituents can drop in. I know that they do this at the federal level, but I'm not sure that they do this. I've never seen this at the state level, but they certainly should do this. And I could absolutely be wrong. So it's a good idea to watch. I know that I have seen some of the legislators announce office hours or community meetings. Like, I know that one of the senators announced that she was going to be at like Pizza Hut in Canal Winchester, and, to join her, come in and have a cup of coffee, or, have a Coke and a piece of pizza. And she actually provided the pizza. So, that does happen. If you can't arrange for a person-to-person meeting, ask the staff, let the staff to try to set up a conference call. Conference calls are good. Zoom calls are better. You can actually have a face-to-face with a legislator.
Yep.
Thank you, Joan. Expect 15 to 20 minutes if you're lucky. sometimes I've been just about ready to go into a legislator meeting, and all of a sudden they're called out for a vote. So now you're sitting in the office waiting another hour, for them to come back, and they're rushed. And sometimes it's just better if you ask them if they want to reschedule. So make sure you have a specific actionable request. You could ask them to introduce a bill, to amend an existing bill, or vote in a certain way. Do not ever have a conversation with the legislator without an ask. Make sure you have an ask, and make sure you understand what you're asking for. Leave your contact information if you have it, relative articles, examples of similar legislation. I have had business cards made up in the past that has my name and my address on one side, and on the other side it says Ohio voter. So that kind of takes them by surprise, but it's a way to get yourself noticed. Follow up in a few weeks. Even if you stumble upon new information after your meeting, forward it along. And once you forward it, make sure you contact the office and say, I have sent some more information. Can you please check to make sure that you have received it and pass it on to the legislator? That's important, because sometimes if they get so many emails and information, they tend, as Joan said, put it in a pile, and it becomes lost in transition. So thank you, Joan.
Can I add something just for me personally?
Yeah.
I never meet with whenever I'm meeting with a legislator, particularly in Columbus, but even in the district as well, I never leave a meeting without leaving something behind in
Right.
terms of my ask, in terms of factual information,
Right.
so that they can review it later and they have it in front of them.
Yeah, a folder with an
Right.
outline.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. And that's excellent, because you need to have something to leave behind, because you don't want to spend your 15 or 20 minutes with the legislator flipping through paper. Know what you want to say, have your ask down packed, and then leave the information that supports your ask. You're right, Larry.
And get an answer to your ask.
Yes.
I have been in groups in a legislator's office where somebody's made that ask and then never waited for the answer.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that happens a lot, because people are so rushed, and you make the ask, and then someone else has something they want to say, and they jump right in. And then, of course, the legislator is not going to take the time to say, oh, well, this is what my answer to your ask is. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, get your answer.
Yep.
And this is a picture now of a group of folk talking with the legislator in the halls of the State House, which is another unique way of conducting meetings. Do we have any questions before we move on to Larry and start talking about elevator speeches and quick meetings like this?
Exciting. Yes, we have just a couple questions here. So if at the federal level you have an issue that falls under a group, say HUD, but you want to talk to somebody at the state level, how do you figure out who might be interested in public housing?
I would look at check out the committees, because most of the state, the House and the Senate have very similar committees. So they would have a committee on housing, that type of thing. So check out the committees would be my first thought. So.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have a question about presenting yourself. So somebody here has an NPA but's never actually used it, and wants to know if she should play as if she doesn't have the degree, or if she should use it as part of her story.
I would use it as you think it can be beneficial. I mean, if it doesn't relate to what you're speaking about, then I don't know what's the point. I don't think there's any point of using it. But if having an MPA or having any degree relates to the bill that you're talking about, it gives some gravitas in terms of your expertise.
Or if you're using part of your MPA, let's say your research skills, for example, and you've used those research skills to look up stuff about this particular issue, then you could use it because it establishes your bona fides as somebody who, can read and research the material, and that you've brought what you've researched. So that's kind of far-fetched, but I've seen it. So it depends on what you're doing.
I think sometimes when you have people with degrees, and I think it becomes pretty obvious to legislators that you are an educated citizen. I've actually had legislators say to me, "And what's your profession?" And my profession is just my nickname. Back 30 years ago was housewife from hell, and so that's my profession. I'm the housewife from hell. So.
All righty. Anything else? Then we could move on to Larry.
Just got jumped in a class several years ago. I was told you do a paper with supporting evidence on top, do no more than 5-page position paper. If you're doing this as professional, include a resume and a business card. My personal business card had my resume in miniature. Basically, here is my degree.
Okay.
That's it.
Anymore, the short attention span that we all have is such that I recommend that you outline it in one page when you're giving a legislator, some of the material that you want, or making the argument that you want to make. Mm-hmm. One page is going to be best anymore. Sorry, we have very short attention spans.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. And highlight the most important thing you want them to read, because that's mostly what they'll read is what's highlighted.
Yep.
Before I get into the elevator speeches, one thing I was thinking about that we hadn't talked about earlier, as you're giving testimony or you're meeting with a legislator individually, never assume that they know the information you know.
Right.
I assume they know nothing, and probably they don't. So if as you're testifying or as you're speaking in the office, tell them the basics. If they know the basics, they'll stop you and say, "I know that," and then you can move forward. But you need to assume that they do not know what they know, because otherwise you're gonna lose them right away because they don't understand what you're talking about.
Good point.
Yep. Oh, wait a minute. Let me say one thing on that too.
Go ahead.
Do not, if a legislator starts explaining something to you, my advice is don't tell him he's wrong. I did that with a state senator one time, and he was just so totally wrong that it wasn't something bad enough that I wanted to make him mad. So my comment was, "That's interesting." So yeah. So anyway.
Okay. So
they're human. They're human, guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the first thing I'm going to talk about is elevator speeches, which got its name from the idea that you saw the legislator in the elevator, and you got to talk to him in the elevator about your and very briefly about the issue you wanted. As we're talking about elevator speeches, the idea we're not talking about a sit-down meeting, but you may catch them in the hallways as that picture was previously, or you may want to kind of corral them as they're leaving a committee room or coming into a committee room. And right now, in these days where during the COVID, it's probably not a great time to be doing them. Although, as we are getting our vaccinations, the opportunity to do that over the coming months may be able to increase. But again, if you can't establish a sit-down meeting, it's a nice way to catch a legislator and get their points. So you can do it kind of haphazardly, or you can do it real methodically. And by talking about methodically, you want to know the legislator, a body of legislators you want to speak with beforehand, such as people from a particular committee. And if you're not able to identify the legislators, or don't know all the faces of the legislators you want to, bring a sheet with the pictures with their pictures and photos on them, which is real easy to find on the page that have been in very other parts of this presentation, legislator, www.legislator.ohio.gov. You can find all the pictures of all the legislators in the House and the Senate by committee, and just bring it with you so you know who to identify. I try not to grab a legislator's attention just as they're going into a committee room, because they're likely not going to have the time to talk to you even for a few seconds. Instead, I try to do it a couple of other ways. When they're leaving the office to go into a legislative session, because in most cases they're going to have to cross the street or go underneath or whatever, and you might have a chance to talk to them that way. Or when they're done with the legislative session and whatever that may be, and as they're going back to their offices, that can be a good time as well. And thereby you might have more time to be able to talk to them. Next page. When you want to talk to a legislator, you want to identify very, very briefly. You want to identify yourself using the legislator's name, and then very, very quickly and establish your credibility immediately and succinctly. Hello, Senator Dolan. My name is Jane Doe. I'm one of your constituents, and I belong to West Shore Unitarian Church, not in his district, but I just use it anyway. Or Jane, I'm a Medicaid expansion recipient who lives in Cleveland, and I'd like to briefly talk to you about Medicaid expansion. So that briefly, and then immediately explain why you're talking to him with a strong action statement. I'm here to talk to you about the critical need that for us to be able to continue to keep full Medicaid expansion for our medical consumers and providers, just to keep Medicaid expansion. That would be fine, good enough as well. Next one. And again, very shortly, provide talking points, very, very brief ones, giving facts, examples, and if you have time, a short personal story and why it's so important. And then if there's time, you might be able to have a discussion. But however it is, at the end, ask him whether you have his or her support for the legislation that you're talking about. Next one. As I say, can we count on your support? Or can we set up a time today for me and a few others, or just me, to talk with you to discuss this further? As Teresa talked about earlier, leaving your name, leaving a little card is good, or give it even better, give it as well to their aide, so we can contact you further. And you don't have to leave a full packet, but even just a sheet in terms of talking about what your issue is all about is good as well. And then at the end of that, what I always like to do after even a short elevator speech is follow up with an email, a letter, an email, basically an email, thanking him for talking to me, and recapping briefly our discussion, and again appealing for his or her support. And that's in a nutshell. It's very easy. Frequently, there are people who can do a host of these in an afternoon, and it's a good way. It's a good way of, in very short ways of getting to legislators. So it's something as you're thinking about, and again, and as the picture that Joan showed earlier, you can do it individually, or if you can do it as a small group if you're doing it together. I tend to do it individually, but certainly you can do it as a group. Last thing I want to talk about is in terms of communicating our message. We've talked all day today. We've all talked this session today around meeting with legislators, testifying in front of legislators, et cetera. I think what we kind of end up with is what's the best way that we can communicate our message? So how do we get legislators to think about our issue? in the way we want them to think about it. How do we get them to think about it? Through group action, not just individual action. And how do we get them to think about it in a way that they will solve it through our aims, passing the legislation? So we can move on. And I think the way that I like to think about it is dealing with frames. And what frames are is the mental structure of our beliefs and values, and knowledge that we all see in terms of the world. It's our biases that we all have around something. It's just in basically our mental lens, the way each of us sees anything that's going on, and the way I may see something, such as the old SB 33 may be very different from somebody who lives, a legislator who lives in that district, in the district where a power plant might be. So their lens is going to be very different. And so we all have to recognize that we all have our own different lens, our own ways of different seeing everything. And that we need, as we're approaching people, we need to think not just in terms of our frames, but their frames. Go back if you can. And so what we want to do is get people to reframe, that we want people to be able to see, we want to challenge the way that they're currently doing reframes to hopefully reframe to see it more like the way we want to. Now you can go to the next one, Joan. So as we're thinking about framing, reframing, getting people to see our issues the way we want to, the way we see them, or the way we at least vote in the way we'd like them to. A few things that are some basic assumptions. The first is people are not blank slates. If we're trying to convince them of something, we've got to recognize that they already have the way they're seeing this, and we can't assume that we're educating them and they're gonna and anything we present to them that they're gonna have a blank slate. Whatever we say, that's going to be the information they use. And so we have to communicate, and we just not communicate talking to them. It's talking back and forth. If we're interacting with people, that's a much better way of them changing their minds than just being a one-way conversation. When communication is ineffective, people fall back into the existing frames that they came with, and we've lost them. If communication is effective, people have the potential of seeing an issue from a different frame, from a different perspective, and we have a chance of changing their minds or convincing them of the way of our own doing that. And so to do that, we need to appeal to things that we can all agree to. And I think from doing that, it's from appealing to higher levels. And so let me talk about levels. That there's kind of three areas of levels of values. Basically, the levels of values that we can all agree to, or so level one is kind of the big ideas, the things that everybody agrees to. Everybody agrees that we should be free, that we have freedom. Everybody agrees in justice. Everybody believes in success. Everybody agrees in responsibility, basic responsibility. We could go on and on, but there are these big ideas that everybody can agree to, even if there's all kinds of things that we don't agree with them in fundamental ways, and we need to recognize that. Level two are also areas that, by and large, we're going to agree to, but they're a little more narrow. The idea of healthcare, everybody believes that everybody should be healthy. That we believe most people believe that we should have a good environment. People don't want to see people poor. People want to see people educated. So by and large, it's not the big ideas that necessarily everybody agrees to, but there's general consensus in those level two things that we want to move forward. Is just that people may have very different perspectives on how we go about doing that. And then there's levels three, which are the specific issues we care about. It can be, it might be the Affordable Care Act. It might be the anti-protesting bills. It might be welfare reform. The people have very different kind of views in terms of doing that, but that's maybe what we're going to talk to people. Ultimately, as we're talking to people about some of those level 3 things, that if we appeal to level 1 or level 2 in terms of trying to do that, we have a better chance of changing their mind. So we want to use those values to set up to set up what is at stake and why it matters. So if we all believe in justice, the idea, if we're talking about Senate Bill 33, or anti-protesting, that if we all believe in justice, then we believe that everybody should have the right to appeal to justice, and part of that is doing peaceful protest that's secure for everybody. So we can talk about it from that kind of perspective, and at least begin in that area and maybe begin to change minds. And those are the way we can get people to care about our issues. We don't want to just simply name drop. If you can go back just a second. We don't want to simply name drop a value that we want to describe it in some detail and describe why it's important to what we're talking about. Again, we want to talk about it societally, not just individually. And we want to express everything in a very reasonable, explanatory tone, not in a preachy morality tone. And so if we talk about that everybody believes in justice, and what we're doing is not justice when we talk about anti-protest, we may believe that firmly, and I believe it, and you may believe it, but we're being preachy. We're not going to convince somebody otherwise. So we don't want to be preachy in the way we do things. Now you can go to the next one. We also want to be able to put it within the context of where people are coming from, as we're talking about. So based on their own lives, if we're talking about the values and whatnot, in our messages, we want to put it in the context of where we're coming from. So for an example, when there are substantial drug issues, particularly heroin issues, that were a big problem, when we all looked upon them as an inner city problem, that was easy to ignore for people who were suburban or exurban or in areas that were not being affected. But now that the opioid crisis is permeated all of society, all of a sudden we put it within that context, and people are much more willing to address it. So if we can put it in context that relates to people, that people can identify with, that are part of people's lives, that gives us a chance to move people forward. So if we're testifying, if we're meeting with legislators, find a way to put it within the context of their own lives or their own constituents' lives in a way that they're going to care about it. You can move forward. So talk about long-term trends. Talk about what's at stake if we neglect the problem. Talk about what's at stake for their constituents. Talk about what's at stake for them, for them, etc. And if we do that, then they can relate to it in a way. Talk about how we are currently addressing this, but again, not in a preachy moral tone. Assign the kind of responsibility, what can be done to be able to do this, and again, present a solution. There's been we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but if you're testifying, or if you're meeting with a legislator, use numbers sparingly. I think they're important to use. Statistics are important to use, but use them sparingly. Sometimes if you use tremendously dramatic numbers, you have the effect of the problem being so big, too scary, that people don't address them. I think that's been part of the issue with the COVID-19. When this all started, people became, and the numbers were much smaller. People could identify it more. Now that it's in the it's in the hundreds of thousands, it's become so big that people, I find people ignore it more than they did earlier when we first started. So somehow we need to get people to identify with it in a meaningful way. And part of that is going back to the stories that we talked about earlier. But so I think you want to provide meaning first, then the numbers, and use numbers strategically, not just the size of the problem, but what it means if we continue to ignore it and what we can be doing. And also use the numbers to underscore the capacity of success. We can succeed if we do blah, blah, blah. And talk about it from that perspective. It's really important that we use an effective tone to communicate our message. If we use extreme statements and partisan attacks, we immediately turn off the people that we're trying to do. It was very frustrating to me during some of the SB 33 testimonies when people started right off the bat attacking ALEC, which was the right-wing group where it came from, or attacking some of the legislators. As soon as we attacked one, we attacked them all. At least attacked all the Republican legislators, and we had no chance of getting through that committee. I think you want to be, extreme statements are not going to work. You may feel that way, but you don't want to use them. You lose credibility when you talk in highly partisan terms. On a personal level, I don't even like to use the word advocate. I mean, I don't want to say I'm advocating for such and such, because if you're advocating for something, if you say you're advocating for something, that means that I'm on one side and somebody else is on another side. And again, going from that high idea that we want to bring people together around our issue, that there's common ground, that somewhat takes it away from that. So again, as I'm doing this, I want to use level 1 value to provide a universal approach that we all agree to this. And it kind of narrows the partisanship in this, and it gives us an opportunity to move forward, whether it's by meeting with the legislator or testifying. Again, it becomes more effective when we appeal to values. And it provides a really good starting point that they can move us forward as we're trying to get people to move forward in an issue. Go ahead, you can move the next one. Is that the last one? Oh.
It is, yes. And we're wrapping up here because I know that people have got to go places. I know everybody wants to go watch Rachel Maddow right now. The president-elect is on, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So I think, thank you. Thank you, Larry. I mean, we're going to wrap up now with just some best practices to remind you, and then move on. And as Kristen said, we're going to send you a copy of this when we get it on YouTube and send you the slides. A couple of best practices that I just want to reiterate. Don't insult the legislators, even if they seem off base, right? They're trying to serve us. They're trying. Don't demean their questions, no matter how dumb they may seem. Don't perform. You are there to persuade, not to perform or to recite poetry, okay? Don't go off topic. Focus, focus, focus on the bill. And don't assume they oppose or support your views as a committee or a group. I was in one, just real quick, where this person giving testimony did this poem, and the refrain of the poem is, "But you're not going to listen to me." Well, guess what? They didn't listen to her because she told them right off the bat that they shouldn't listen to her. And it was long and it was boring. But don't assume. Don't make those assumptions. The most Republican of Republicans may hear you and be changed. Okay? Teresa, Larry, any other best practices before we kind of wrap this one up?
Nope.
Okay. Oh, Teresa, you're muted, hon. I see you speaking, but you're muted.
I know. I have a hard time myself going to the State House because sometimes it physically makes me ill just to be in the rooms. And at one point we had like a 2-hour break while they went into session. And so I went down into the catacombs to have a cup of coffee. And I was so amazed. I was sitting there. I love to watch people. And I was sitting there and it was just like, wait a minute, what am I seeing? And I kept saying, old white man, old white man, old white man, young white man, bigger problem. And it's just like, you know, our state house is just way too white. We need color in our state house. And if any of you know anyone of color or any minority, encourage them to get into the electoral. We need to get those old white men out of there. And until we change the face of our legislature, we're going to have more and more and more of these kinds of conversations.
Yep.
And I thank all of you for being here tonight. And I am a little more radical than Joan and Larry is. So I myself, I've testified in Washington. I was threatened by a legislator in Washington. So myself, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do this, but I never thank a legislator for allowing me to testify. That is his job.
Or her job.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Right,
Thank you. And I see immediately one statement from Shelley. And she had outlined, Larry, how to move down into the values levels. And I think it's very, very good. So Shelley, yes, your way of addressing it, I think, is really good in terms of moving into the different levels of values. So absolutely wonderful. We do have resources. We're going to send those resources out to you so that you can see them and use them. And we're going to wrap up now with just another quick statement from John Lewis to put a period on this sentence. He said, take a long, hard look down the road you want to travel once you've made a commitment to work for justice and change. And know that this transformation will not happen right away because change often takes time. It rarely happens all at once. So he said, we must understand that the struggle is not a struggle that lasts for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. It's the struggle of a lifetime. Thank you all. Thank you.